Hey, folks, welcome to another show. Statistically speaking, there's another pandemic that's going on, and it's something that's very serious and very sensitive to talk about, and that is child abuse, and particularly in the area of sexual abuse. The statistics are overwhelming as to what's going on. I mean, think about this: one in four girls are sexually abused that we know of. One in six boys are sexually abused that we know of. And so it's a topic that's extremely sensitive. And yet I think it's a topic that is important that we become aware of and that we learn some techniques on how to protect our children. So I look forward to having you join us today. I'm interviewing a lovely young lady who has written a number of books and is very much an expert in really sexual abuse prevention. Her name is Kimberly King. So look forward to having you join us.
At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Hey, folks, thanks for joining us today. This is Dr. Doug with Dr. Doug and Friends Radio, Inspire Vision. And, when we talk about Inspire Vision, it's really a whole point of how do we make a difference in other people's lives? And that comes about in various ways. And today I am really pleased to have Kimberly King on the show with us today. We're going to talk about some real sensitive issues. And I think that it's going to be valuable for all that are listening. Kimberly, how are you doing?
Hey, hello. How are you doing? I'm great. Thank you
Oh,
so much
great.
for having me.
Well, thanks for being on the show, and thank you for what you're doing. You're a parent, you're a teacher, you're a sexual abuse prevention advocate. Obviously, you're an award-winning author, and you've written some amazing books. Um, Tell the audience a little bit about yourself, your story, and how do you get to this point where you're really advocating for our children?
Sure, I'm happy to share my story because with sharing it through all these years of sharing the story, I know that it can help parents and help protect kids. It's not always easy, even for me, to share it. So if I have to take a deep breath, I might. That's okay. But so my story, I've connected the dots sort of backwards. I was a victim of a sexual assault in college. And that was back in 1988. When that happened to me, I showed up to college not knowing anything about sex, about sexual abuse prevention, about consent. So I showed up, and my first week of school, I was sexually assaulted by a football player. And I was horrified, didn't know what to do, panicked, and I called my mom. Now, back then in 1988, my mom didn't know what to do either. She didn't know how to advise me. So she told me I should come home from school. I didn't want to do that. So we came up with an alternative that I would move out of the dorm. And she told me not to report it because people would judge me, no one would believe me, and it would ruin my reputation. So I dove into the field to try and learn about it, and I ended up volunteering at the health center on my college, and I got involved in prevention right away. Now that just helping other people and sharing my story with other college girls helped me heal. Fast forward many, many years. I'm a kindergarten teacher. I'm a mom. I have three children. And my son had an event at a sleepover party. I had to go back to a hospital with a sick baby and left my children with my neighbor who I trusted and loved. We were great friends. And on that night, her son, who was just a little bit older than my son, tried to get my son to do things that involve private parts. So back then, he didn't have a cell phone. He couldn't contact me, but he did have some strategies that I had taught him about body safety, about body boundaries, and about trying to get help if he ever found himself in the situation. So he ended up trying to tell the mom what was going on, and she didn't believe him. So in the midst of this crisis that was happening for my son, he decided that he was going to come up with an exit plan. So he took himself into the bathroom. He told everybody he was sick and he shut the door. So he got himself to safety because that was really all he could do. In the morning, he came and told me. So he basically came out. I got back from the hospital. We had one crisis with a baby, calmed down. And my husband, by the way, was deployed at the time. So I was essentially functioning as a single mom at that moment. So anyway, he came out and he said, Mom, I had a red flag situation. My friend tried to do this and that. And he just crumpled because he was so scared about like not getting help and being stuck in that bathroom. So his story kind of triggered like many emotions for me. And just the fact that, wow, thank God he told. That's because some of the things that I taught him, but I never thought that a friend was a risk. And I didn't understand where the risks were, even at that time in my life. It was 1999 when my son was born. This event happened in 2005. So this was quite some time ago, but I didn't know. I thought that strangers were the real danger. So I hadn't taught my kids that they might be at risk from somebody that they know or from an older friend. So that whole story motivated me to research, become an educator. And together, my son and I wrote the book, I Said No. So that was a long story,
Okay.
but
Well,
that's how we got there.
and you have written that book. It's called I Said No. And it's a kid to kid guide to keeping private parts private. Interesting what you brought up, though, is I think that as we talk about child abuse, and particularly we're focusing here on sexual abuse, as you say, most of the time they think it's a stranger. I'm not sure that I have thought about that process. I've always thought it's, potentially a family member or a friend, but much more of an adult or an older situation. Here you're talking about a young person to a young person.
Right.
How often do you find that's the case versus the common thought process that it's an adult?
So it's interesting. Sexual abuse is really only reported 70% of kids don't ever tell. And so we really don't know the actual number, but 1 in 6 girls and 1 in 4 boys are sexually abused before the age of 18. And of that statistic, 40% of that abuse comes from older, more powerful children. So for me, when this happened with my son, it was very confusing because is a child that is 1.5 years older than your child abusing your child, or is that normal sexual curiosity? So as I got more into the story, I learned that it became more than just like, let's play doctor. What it wasn't curiosity so much as that the other child started to use these techniques on my son that included bribing him. So he asked him to do something and he said he would give him $50. Then, when he wouldn't do what he asked, he threatened my son. And then after that, he told him a bunch of lies and he really manipulated my son into thinking that my son was a bad kid and that all the cool kids do this. And so he had all these tactics, and the tactics where the red flags went up in my mind because a 6-year-old doesn't have that kind of language and doesn't know about certain things. So as time went on, I later found out that that child was being abused by somebody at his church. So it doesn't happen just like abuse doesn't happen just in isolation. There's this ripple effect. But it is more and more common today because kids are very much online seeing inappropriate content, and they can reenact things on other children. And so what used to be normal sexual curiosity based on an age can turn into something else now. And that's what's scary, like the access that our kids have to information that they shouldn't, and then the access that predators have. So yes, we are at risk with children that are older, but there's also this huge online risk to our kids today. So,
Well, and so again, I just want to really get this clear in my mind, because you bring up such an interesting point that so often that abuse is occurring by older children,
right,
not necessarily the same age. Maybe, if it's a young person, you're right, it could be just curiosity.
right.
But when you have an older child then that's doing that, percentage wise, have you had a chance to really research that out from the standpoint of an adult sexual abuser compared to just an older child sexual abuser? I think that would be interesting to know what the percentages are on that.
So then the older children, the larger, more powerful children, that accounts for like between 30 and 40% of abuse. The
Wow.
other part of it that is reported are
Yeah.
adults. So we're looking at 60% of the rest of the abuse is from adults. Now it's just really hard to track because of the fact that kids don't usually tell. And then when you take that and you look at that a little more deeper, the whole topic of like parents that abuse their children, sexually abuse their children, or step parents or family members who sexually abuse their children, it is almost impossible for a child to come forward and tell. And if they do, sometimes they're not believed, sometimes they're not supported. And sometimes they basically get stuck living in an abusive situation and they don't know who to tell. So, really, the numbers are almost impossible to get an actual count on, but it's much worse. I Sexual abuse, not to scare your audience, but it is the biggest risk to children's health and wellness. It's a pandemic, and it continues. And so you bringing it up and talking about it and me talking about it and just getting people talking about it is going to help. And that's what I want to do, is just bring awareness to the topic and share some strategies with parents.
Well, and I think, you bring up an interesting point, pandemic, and as I think about that and think about how we have reacted to the COVID pandemic, there are those that, refuse to wear masks and they're
Right.
out doing whatever they do. There are those that are cautious and are wearing masks according to what they think is appropriate. And then there are those that won't even walk outside their house. They are so fearful. And how do you talk about this particular topic and help parents to kind of be in that middle situation where they're cautious, they're concerned, they're aware, and yet they don't become so fearful that it
Right.
literally affects not only their life but the lives of their children? How do you do that?
That's a great, great question. So, I guess how I do that is by sharing my story, by writing my book. But then what I do is I have online parenting classes that are parent friendly. So, we just talk about some basics. And if you start talking about the basics early, it's a whole lot easier. So, what I do when I teach parents is I give them like 3 or 4 simple strategies that they can start like tomorrow if they wanted to. And they're not scary. They're If you do them up front, you're just doing some safety prevention for your family. It's like wearing a helmet when you go ride a bike, or it's like buckling in when you get into a car. If you do a few things, you add a layer of protection. So, first thing, well, I mean, I can go into the list of like the top 4 things I teach parents. That's just, they're simple and they're easy. The first one is teaching your kids about the anatomically correct names for their body parts. And the reason for this is because it's simply easy to do, and they're potty training and you're teaching them about their bodies and you're helping them get clean and you're, trying to teach them how their body works. It's really easy to say, well, this part is called, I don't know if I can say it on your show. So I'm just going to say, this is your private part. The doctor calls it this.
Right.
And I think it's okay for parents to have, silly words for kids. Families have all sorts of different words for body parts. But there are 2 reasons why that is a little bit not safe. The first one is knowing the correct word for your private part becomes a red flag for an abuser. So if your child happens to be in a grooming situation and your child starts talking, oh, well, I know what that's called. And oh, I can't keep privates about that. I can't keep secrets about that. And I know my body boundaries. And if he starts talking about some of the things that the child already knows, that's a red flag for an abuser to pick somebody else, because abusers don't want to get caught. And if they have just a little inkling that your child knows some stuff, they're going to move on. So that's number one. The second reason why you want them to know that the name of that part is, God forbid, in the event that your child has some type of sexual abuse or close call with sexual abuse, you want your child to be able to report it in the correct way so that somebody hears them. And the reason I had an experience with this, my first kindergarten, I was teaching, I think I was 25 years old, my first kindergarten job. I was all excited and busy. It was like week 2 into my kindergarten classroom, and we're doing journals, and I'm like, stressed out. And little girl comes up behind me and says, "Miss King, my daddy took my cookie last night." And so I said, "Oh, well, tell your daddy not to take your cookie." And I just sort of brushed her off and got back into what I was doing and didn't think anything of it. The next day, that little girl came back. She tugged on my shirt again and she was sad. And she said, "Miss King, my cookie hurts. He touched my cookie again." And I said, "He touched your cookie? What do you mean? And where is this cookie?" And she pointed to her private area. And I was like, "Oh my God." Like, wait a minute, what? And so I did not know that word cookie, and she did not know my word. So we completely missed the communication. And because I missed it, that little girl had to suffer abuse for one more day. So that is a really important thing that parents can just start like tomorrow. Just introduce the correct word and just say, we need to know this word. And if we ever have a problem with that part, you got to use that word with adults, because adults might not know your word. So that's easy.
Let me ask you a question about that. And I know that there will be some that are reticent about using the exact terminology. What about just using private parts to
You can
where
say that too.
they say, you know what, these are your private parts,
Right.
and at least they're able to use that. Does that make a difference for
Yes.
some?
I think that
Okay.
if you're uncomfortable using those words, it's interesting. Kids are not uncomfortable about using those words because they don't have any attachment. They don't have any baggage about what those words mean. And like kids are like, "Oh, no big deal. It's a blah. It's fine." But parents have these attachments to the word. Maybe they've been through abuse. Maybe they just feel awkward about it. So yeah, if you are awkward about it and you don't feel comfortable, then definitely teach them private parts and like have them be able to point to them. That is a good backup strategy.
Good. Okay,
So
go on.
um, the second thing that I like to tell parents that is, really important is to teach their kids that their whole body is private, and that they have the right to say yes or no to touch, to unwanted touch. So it's kind of tricky to explain, but when you teach your kids about consent, you have to show them that like people need to come and ask them if they can give a hug or if they can touch them, and then your kid needs to be trained on the ability to say yes or no. So that's really important. And then once you teach that, you can go into a little bit deeper and say, and so your whole body's private, people have to ask, you are the boss of your body, but when it comes to your private parts, there are special rules for your private parts. And the rules are that if anybody tries to touch them or look at them, or if anybody asks you to touch or look at them, you need to raise a little red flag and come tell a safe adult. So you start to train them, not scare them, but just it's something just like buckling in that seatbelt. If somebody tries to get into your space, you got to tell mom, you got to tell dad, you have to tell your safe adult. And then the third thing that I think is super important to parents, and this one's super easy to teach, like everybody can do this tomorrow, is the whole topic of secrets. So, secrets are pretty tricky for kids to understand. And, they hear about there's good secrets and bad secrets and safe secrets and unsafe. It's just confusing. So, abusers use secrets to test the waters. It's part of the grooming process. And so, they might start with, like, if you have a babysitter, your babysitter might say, "Oh, don't tell mom that I let you stay up until 11:30," and start with like a really benign secret. And then if your child keeps that simple secret, they'll add a more complicated secret, and they'll do a few testing secrets. And if your kid keeps those secrets, then that abuser might take some additional steps, like show your child some pornography or touch your child in an inappropriate way and just test the waters. But if your child knows that he or she is not going to keep secrets from the parents, and that we have like a no secret rule in the family, then right away your child can say, "Oh, sorry, I can't keep that secret because we have a no safety rule. We have safety rules for no secrets." So that's a red flag for an abuser. They'll know your kid is prepped and they'll move on again. So it's important to teach your kids about that. And, kids do need to know about surprises. There's a difference between a surprise and a secret. So, a surprise, I teach my parents is how to work on that with your kids is just say, so surprises are things that we know are going to come out. We expect them to be happy and they are planned. So, a good example is like mom's birthday. So, that's not a secret. If we're having a surprise birthday for mom, that's not a secret. That is just a surprise. It's planned and it has a happy outcome. So those are my
So,
top three.
so secrets, I think it can be tough sometimes for kids. How do parents approach it in a way that the kids feel comfortable? I mean, let's say they're a younger kid and they're out doing something, and they know they've done something probably not right,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden, for them, that becomes a secret that they don't necessarily want to tell their parents. How do
Right.
you help them get to that point, and how do you help parents develop a parenting strategy that says, you can tell me anything. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not necessarily going to punish you if you do something wrong, and we're not talking about the sexual abuse here.
Right.
How do you help that type of communication to occur to where the parents aren't going to punish a child for having done something and then not telling the parent and then the parent finding out? Because
Yeah,
that happens a lot.
that does. I mean, that happens all the time. And that's something that you do need to start early with open communication. So I think with kids, they do need to know that they can come to you and they can talk to you about the good in their day, about the bad in their day, and about the mistakes that they made. And if you come at it as, you are just open and available with a judgment free zone, they will come to you with the tough stuff, and you want that to happen. So but it does need to be laid, at the very beginning, like even in preschool. And I remember I remember my son, he kissed a girl on the bus, and and he got in trouble with the bus driver, and he came off the bus and he goes, "Oh mom, I've been keeping a secret from you, but I know I should have told you, and now I'm going to be in trouble because the principal's calling." And I'm like, "What's the secret?" And so he told me, I'm like, "Okay, well, thank you for telling me." So you always want to validate when someone tells you something like that. And then I just said, "You know what? It's okay. You made a mistake. And so let's talk about it and let's figure out how we can handle it better next time." And then we just move on. The thing is, especially when your kids get to be teenagers, they're on their phones, they're online, there's a whole lot of inappropriate texting and sexting and sending of pictures and things that kids get into. And sometimes they get in too deep, and they will need your help for sure. So if you have this open relationship that is non-judgmental and empathetic and understanding, when they get to be 13 and 14, if they make a pretty big mistake, you want them to come to you and say, "Mom, oh my gosh, like I have done this, I need your help," instead of going, "Oh my god, mom is going to kill me." You don't want that. You want the openness and the support. And it's basically like laying a foundation from the very beginning. And it's okay to punish your kids when they make mistakes. It's okay to give them a timeout when they make a mistake. but you just don't put them in timeout and say, sit there. You say, okay, you're going to go to timeout and sit for a minute. And then we're going to talk about your mistake. And then we're going to process how we can change that mistake. And we're going to say sorry and just be aware that we all make mistakes. I talk to my kids all the time about that. I'm constantly making mistakes, but communication is key.
Okay, so you talked about three. Did you include the fourth one in there
No,
somewhere?
I got off track. The fourth one, I can go on and on. The fourth one that I think is really critical for parents is to develop what I call a safety circle. So when you are teaching your kids about body boundaries, about body safety and consent, those early like ground laying the groundwork concepts that will eventually help your kids be safe, you want to include at least three adults that you know and trust to be part of your safety plan. And so what you would do is pick three. I would say like maybe a grandma, an auntie, a teacher. You decide, but you come up with who your kids feel the most safe and most comfortable with for any emergency. It could be that they got hurt on the soccer field and they can't get a hold of mom, so they know who to call for that emergency. The safe adults, when you're talking about the safety plan for sexual abuse, you let them know, hey, we're learning about consent and body safety. And so, would you like to be on our team? Because we are really trying to learn things and have systems in place so that if we have a problem, we have people to call. So, of course, grandma's going to say, yes, I would love to learn. And then you include her in some of the conversations that you're talking about, and you share some of the books that you're reading with your kids. And then if there is a problem, if it's a soccer injury or if it's that your child is uncomfortable at a sleepover party, your child can call that person if you're not available and say, grandma, I'm having a red flag situation, can you come get me? And in the event that there is a sexual abuse incident, then if your child might not be comfortable telling you, but maybe they would be more comfortable telling their mom, the grandma, or a teacher. And that person who receives that report just needs to know how to handle it. Because when kids report, all they really need is to be like thanked for telling and supported and saying, like, wow, thank you so much for telling me. I believe you. And now I'm going to react as a responsible adult and get help for this problem and take action. What I did when I when I received this story from my son that morning, I was exhausted and I heard this story from my son. I completely freaked out. I got upset. I let my emotions get the best of me. I wanted to run into the house and yell at people. So I had to calm down because my emotions were getting him more upset. So I quickly realized that how you receive this topic is critical. If you receive it in a calm, supportive way, your child is going to tell you more. They're not going to get into blaming themselves. They're not going to worry so much. And you do want to reiterate, you support them, you believe them, and let them know that it is not their fault. And you're so proud that they told you.
Well, I love that terminology of a red flag situation. Do you find that using that type of that type of terminology is a little bit easier for the kids? So if they were to call you and say, "Hey, I'm in a red flag situation," you
Yes,
know to react, what's going on,
right.
type of thing. But you actually have a story about that, don't you, red flag lady?
Yeah. I I do have a funny story about that. I was at a book signing, and my book has all of these red flags for kids to learn, and they learn to identify dangerous feelings and uncomfortable feelings by like raising a little mental red flag and then taking steps to get help. So I was at a book signing at Barnes and Noble, and this little girl like saw the book and came running up to me, and she was like, "You're the red flag lady. You're the red flag lady." And I was like, "Oh my god!" So she told me that because of my book, she knew that there was a red flag, and she told her mom. And that was the first time that I had ever heard that kind of feedback from a real in-person person about how our story and sharing it helped them get help and prevent another situation. So that just like warmed my heart. I mean, I get a lot of feedback and things on my website, and my book has something like, I don't know, 2,000 reviews, and most of them are very like, thank you so much for writing the book, and thank you for sharing my story, and I like this and I like that about it, and all of that. But to actually meet a little person who I helped was just so, it was heartwarming. It was really great.
Well, and I know we've talked a lot about some things, but I'd love for you to share two things. Number one, what are those red flags? And very specifically that parents can teach their children. And obviously using your book would be a big help on that. And then secondarily, for parents or for family members that are suddenly observing certain signs, what are those signs that they can recognize, that they can have a hint that, you know what, there are some red flags there and the
Sure.
child just isn't willing. So let's go with the first one. What are the red flags?
I'm going to show you a little page from my book. Uh,
Okay. And a lot of
so
people are just listening rather than watching here. So
let me tell you about that page. So in the book, on the red flag page, we talk about how red flags make you come to the understanding that you're uncomfortable, and you're raising a red flag when you're in connection with an emotion. So it might be that your child is feeling scared or worried or concerned or anything uncomfortable. We teach them to raise that red flag, and then when they do, that triggers an action. So they raise the red flag, and then they go in their head, okay, I need to think, say, and do something. So we teach them to think, this feels uncomfortable, I'm raising a red flag. Then we teach them to say something like, I don't like that, I'm going to call my mom. And then we teach them to do something, which is call mom. So it's basically just a visual aid to get kids to get comfortable with their emotions. We do it the same for a green flag. So we talk about what are the feelings that make you happy. Green means go, green means good, green means happy, joyous, fun, silly. And so teaching kids to identify emotions is a big part of the book, and a strategy for parents. And we use the red flag in a part of the book which talks about code words. And that's a really good question you brought up. So if your child has an incident at a party or at a play date and they're embarrassed to tell you what's happening, if you come up with a family code word, the child can call you and just say red flag, or they can call you and say pizza. It doesn't matter what the code word is, but you agree upon that code word beforehand. And the code word means that you come quickly without asking any questions. That way, the kid doesn't have to elaborate. You come quickly, you get your child in the car, you go home, and you agree to talk about whatever it was later. So it's a great strategy for parents to incorporate. What was the second
you
part?
know, and you brought up something interesting too. I think this communication is so important, and I think sometimes our kids, are being taught, I want you to tell me if there's a red flag here, but they don't really get taught to, you know what, I want you to share all the fun, all the green lights. I want you to share
Right.
all the green flags, all the things that are happening, so that there's that open type of communication to the point where, hey, if they had great something happen, they can just be excited and tell you about it. And I think that comes to the parenting, and it comes to the
It
ability
does.
of a parent to sit back and go, you know what, my kid talks a lot, but I'm willing to listen, because they're not only telling me maybe the red flag things, but they're telling me the happy things. And if I'm allowing them to do both, it's going to make a huge difference in that communication.
It is absolutely. And there's lots of fun things you can do with your kids to get them to open up about their feelings and like make it part of your family tradition. We used to do, like, at the dinner table, we would always sit down and, say, what was the best part of your day? Or did something make you laugh today? Because when you ask kids how was school, they're like, fine. You gotta get a little bit creative to get some of that good feedback from them. So I would always do these questions at the dinner table. And you don't always have to be like, what was the best part of your day? You can say, did you have any trouble today? Or did anybody make you feel bad? And just like bringing up talking points at the dinner table is a great way to start that. Once your kids have language, you can model it. Your husband and wife or your partner can just model that conversation and talk to each other, because a lot of times these days we're not talking. We're just in that zone of getting things done, and everybody's online, everybody's on their phone, and half the time kids don't look up. They're just like head down and absorbed in their social media and all of that. So you really do have to make an attempt and a scheduled time to get at that good information from them.
Oh, that's great. And okay, so
Oh, you asked about
how
the
do we
sign,
recognize the signs if our
right?
child is experiencing some type of abuse that they're afraid to talk about?
That's a really good question. So usually, there aren't a whole lot of signs, but sometimes there are. So physical signs can happen. So you would look for redness in the area, like frequent urination from possibly like a urinary tract infection. You might see bruising in that area, but or typically though, that's not what parents notice first. Usually, if you're looking for the signs and you're aware of them, it might manifest more like a behavior change. So your child might withdraw from the family. They might become suddenly anxious. They might become suddenly strangely organized, or obsessing about this or that, or fearful to go to uncle's house, or fearful to go to church group. And so whenever the normal behavior of your child changes in a way that is maybe anxious or scared or like avoiding, that's when you want to ask some additional questions. And kids don't always I mean, actually kids rarely come out and say, "Hey mom, Uncle Jimmy sexually abused me last week." That isn't going to happen usually. They might say, "Mom, I had a tummy ache. I don't want to go to Uncle Jimmy's." Or, "No, Uncle Jimmy was mean. I don't want to go see him." So they might start just with these little subtle excuses for why they don't want to go to a particular place or be with a particular person. And then you can investigate that and just say, "So tell me more." And it's got to be very open, just tell me more. Did something happen that bothered you? Were your feelings hurt? And you just sort of ask some very light questions to see if you can get your child to communicate. And if still nothing, you can ask them, did you have a red flag? And then, because you've had that language already established, it's a little bit easier for them to say, "No, I didn't have a red flag. I just, Uncle Jimmy was mean." Or, "Yes, I did have a red flag." And then you can say, "Okay, can you tell me about that?"
That can be tough to get them to talk.
It can. And it's all about the layering and the foundation and the communication. And I think really that's the most important thing, talking to your kids, checking in with your kids, being aware of their emotions, and teaching them that emotional intelligence where they're able to communicate with you and check in with themselves. Like sometimes kids don't know why they're feeling anxious or why they're feeling scared, and you just have to talk. You got to connect on their
Well,
level.
and do you actually teach your children how to be aware of the tactics? I mean, you get to the point where how do you eliminate the fear, and teach fear into a child versus just teaching awareness?
Right.
And as you have that kind of open communication with them, do you actually teach your children, if you start to see someone doing this or doing that, please let me know.
Yeah. I
That
mean,
may be a red flag.
you do a little bit of both. So first of all, like we can't just read a book and teach kids these strategies and then leave it. So parents have to get ahead of it in a whole bunch of other ways by learning the facts about sexual abuse, like where it happens, when it happens, who it happens, why it happens, and then also eliminating the risk. And there are a lot of things parents can do to eliminate the risks. So I focus on that, and then teaching parents how to use my book as a tool. And so, yeah, you're not going to want to go teach your kids, these 10 strategies that are in my book all in one sitting and then say good luck. So you that won't work. So you've got to really pick my book is divided into topics, and most of them are actually all of them are kid friendly because the book is written in my son's voice, and so there's a kid friendly tone to the book. There's a little bit of humor in the book, and you can read 2 pages and then leave it alone. And at the end of every little mini chapter, there's a very approachable talking point. So, for instance, I teach on one page what the difference between a bribe, a threat, and a treat is. So it's just very like matter of fact. A treat is something that somebody gives you for doing a good job. Like your teacher might give you a sticker when you hand in your homework, and that's okay. And, give lots of examples of that. But then, it's important to let them know like sometimes not nice people, red flag people, they might try to bribe you. And a bribe is really about getting a kid to do something that they normally wouldn't do. So we can talk all about bribes with kids and how different bribes might look, and that's not scary, just that language. And then when they're ready, you can bring that further and say, so if anybody tries to bribe you about a private part, then you got to tell mom. And the other thing is threats. Like kids do need to know, especially if they're actively being abused, that abusers will use manipulation and threats. So what they look like, and if a kid hears that and they think, "Ah, well, this is a threat. I I know that this person is trying to hurt me." And we always teach in my book and in my parenting classes that people that you raise red flags to, they lie. So when a person might say, "Oh, I'm not going to be your friend anymore," or "Oh, I'm going to tell your mommy it was your idea," or "Oh, I'm going to, if you tell anybody," like if an adult might say, "If you tell anybody, I'm going to hurt your family." Some of those big threats, you don't have to go that far into it, but just lay the groundwork that those things happen. And when you're in that red flag area, those threats are lies. So teaching kids to look out for certain behaviors just in a very calm, basic way. And then it's really up to the parent to elaborate however much or however little they want on that topic.
A lot of communication.
Lots.
And I would think for parents, a bit of fear and caution about this, and yet not doing it actually is more fearful, I suppose, than doing it.
Right. And I think that's the thing about this topic is how do you get parents and kids, how do you get everybody on board so that we take some steps towards prevention? And I think parents get overwhelmed because it is such a big topic and it's on the news every day. You see, last week you see in Greece, New York, a principal who, abused kids, and there's all these victims, and it's scary. But if you can just move away from your fear for a minute and just do it anyway, because learning this stuff, learning just a few basic facts, learning some statistics, and learning some strategies to keep your kids safe will make your child a less attractive target. And that's what you want. You don't want your child to be the victim of sexual abuse. Your whole focus as a parent is to keep your child safe. And there really are things that you can do that will help. So I guess my point is like, why not? Like, who wouldn't want to learn a little bit? And if you feel uncomfortable, that's normal. We all feel uncomfortable. I feel uncomfortable talking about it sometimes, but I just do it because I know people need to hear it. So,
Well, and again, the statistics are frightening, and yet we all know that those statistics aren't even close to
yeah.
the real statistics. So again, for young women, what are those statistics? One in
So it's for girls, 1 in 6, and for girls 1 in 4, boys 1 in 6 before the age of 18. And then an important thing to remember and to learn as a parent is that 90% of child sexual abuse happens within the very inner circles of the people we know and trust. 90%. So Those people are can be family members, they can be distant family members, they can be neighbors, they can be youth group leaders, Cub Scout leaders, church. It can be anybody. What's also hard for parents to like really take in is that, you know, these people are sort of attracted to these roles where they are trusted. So you trust your babysitter, you trust your childcare people, you trust your camps, you trust your baseball coach, you trust people. And it's that statistic, I think, is, if you're going to learn anything, is the most important. It's really not so much this stranger in the white van. It's the people you know. And one interesting statistic that, you know, is also a little bit alarming is the fact that, you know, the whole thing about people not telling. And so if 70% of kids don't tell, why aren't they telling? So that's where I want to do the work. I want to do the work to get them. If I can't prevent all abuse, if I can't get it to every family and teach this to everybody, you and I talking about this will help with that statistic. Because if we arm parents with this knowledge and we give them like resources and they get educated and empowered, and their kids know that it's not their fault, and their kids know that they're not going to be in trouble, and their kids are open and they know they can tell mom everything, then maybe we have a chance at stopping some of this, which is the ultimate goal, like preventing this from happening, but also stopping any abuse that's going on right now.
Well, and I love that. I love that. So, kind of as a final message to our audience, um, what would that be?
Let's see. Well, to your audience, I would say that although this may seem uncomfortable and scary, I just encourage you to just break through that fear and try to learn just a few steps to keep your kids safe. It is something that you can do from the privacy of your own home. You can come over to my website and take, I have a free class on my website, kimberlykingbooks.com, and you can take one of my parent friendly training courses. It My course is not scary. It's just factual. There's some great videos for kids that help teach some of these lessons. Some of these videos are actually cute and charming. The parts about like keeping, there's a great video I have called Pants, which is just a cute little dinosaur. We can lighten this up so that it is approachable. And I just don't want anybody to think that this is all scary. This is actually just as important as putting on a seatbelt. And so put the seatbelt on, you click your kids in the car seats, you do all of that. So make this part of your parenting plan because it is about safety.
Kimberly, thank you. Thank
You're
you for
welcome.
being on the show. And more importantly, thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me and giving me the opportunity to talk about it. I mean, it's a great thing. So I really appreciate it.
Well, and folks, thanks for being on, listening to us today. I hope it's making a difference for you. And oftentimes we avoid doing things which can be somewhat fearful and tough. And yet I think this is one area where we could all really take note of what Kimberly shared with us and do a better job. And I think it's going to protect our children in a much better way. So thanks for listening. We look forward to having you join us again soon. Bye now.